This is Closer by Dennis Cooper. Part 6. George. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. George streaked toward his room. "I'm home." He passed the kitchen door. His dad was drinking espresso. "George, wait!" He double-bolted his door. "I know it's here," he thought, pawing through a desk drawer. At the bottom were 2 crinkled, typewritten pages. They contained detailed descriptions, in French, of how he looked, smelled, and tasted. Philippe had presented them to him a few weeks ago, with the words, "This is you in a, how you say, nutshell." He should know, George thought. Now, if I buy a French dictionary... "George!" He dropped the pages and kicked them under his bed. "Just a second." He let his dad in. "Son, I thought we might go for a drive to the ridge and look down at the pretty lights. How about it?" That was the last thing George wanted to do. "I'm busy. I just thought..." "Really, Dad?" Mr. Miles wandered back to the kitchen. George lifted his Mickey Mouse cup, grabbed a tab of the acid he'd stashed there, and slipped it under his tongue. He set the Cramps' Garbage Man 45 on his turntable. "Do you understand? Do you understand?" By its end, he was seeing things. There was a huge map of Disneyland over his bed. He liked to stare at it, picture his favorite lands or imagine new areas stocked with rides. Acid helped. He closed his eyes and, in 10 seconds flat, he was tiptoeing through an attraction. Room after room after room of incredible holograms. Over his head, a Milky Way of skulls shaped like turtles. He was knee-deep in a lime-green fog, populated by see-through ghosts, skimpy as Kleenexes. A booming, vaguely familiar voice wafted out of the camouflage speakers. "Georges?" "Shit, what time is it?" He opened his eyes. For a couple of seconds, the ride and his bedroom were double exposed like a photograph. The goofy clock on his little night table read 6:37. "I'm late," he gasped, shooting up to his feet. "Bye, Dad." He slammed the front door. He stood on the sidewalk and stuck out his thumb. A trucker chose him. The guy seemed friendly enough, but he kept asking personal questions. "Do you have a girlfriend?" he leered at one point. "Look, I'm on acid, so leave me alone, all right?" That shut him up. George hallucinated in peace. He knocked. Philippe let him in. "Georges, my friend Tom is here, and I thought..." "Phil, he's a spectacle!" It was an older man. He looked like a stork wearing glasses. "Thanks," George said quickly. Tom," Philippe said, "Georges and I will be very alone for a minute." "I thought a change would be good," he continued, once Tom left the room. George was pissed off, but the acid made anger seem corny to him at that moment. More than anything, he was amazed by Philippe's eyes. They looked unusually pleased, but he felt even less warmth than ever from them. "Prepare, and I will see you back here." George walked to the bathroom, stripped. He stared at the mirror while all sorts of scattered thoughts raced through his mind. None stayed long enough to complete themselves. "Later," he said aloud, popping a zit on his upper back. He lay face down on the living room rug. Philippe's friend said some nice things about him. One of the 2 guys caressed his ass, then used some fingers to open its hole so wide George felt cold air rush in. "Maybe," Tom said, to which Philippe answered, "Good." How had Philippe put it? "Your asshole looks like a child's pout." George couldn't remember the rest. "Shit, baby." That was Philippe's voice, so George pushed a couple of turds out. "What does he normally eat?" Tom asked. "Hamburgers, French fries, candy bars." I could have guessed. 2 fingers slid up his ass. Since he'd met Philippe, George had learned how to count them. 2 more joined in. He hadn't taken that many before. Not bad, he thought. Someone felt for his lips, pried them open, and 4 fingers slid down his throat. "He's got a big mouth," Tom whispered. "I love that." George gagged a few times. "Let it loose," Philippe said, in a soothing voice. George didn't want to. Then he was vomiting. When that ran out, he noticed most of Tom's hand was inside his hole. The other was fiddling around in his throat like it had dropped something. Someone was spanking him. Picturing how his ass looked usually helped him relax. He knew the thing was bright red, but he couldn't imagine an arm sticking out of it. Maybe it looked like an elephant. If that was so, Tom's praise made more sense. Really, George thought, that would be great. "Oh God, I take this child beyond the shit." Some of the words were Tom's, some Philippe's. Cum splattered over his ass, back, and legs. The hands withdrew. "Is there anything else you want to understand?" That was Philippe's voice. "No, got it." Tom. George sat up. He couldn't see very well, but he picked out Tom's glasses. "Do you have any idea how soft you are inside?" Tom asked. George felt incredibly stoned. He managed to say, "I guess." Philippe laughed. "You must have been fisted before." That was Tom again. "No," George shook his head. Once George had showered and dressed, Tom gave him a lift. All the way home, Tom kept asking if he had enjoyed himself, then if he liked playing dead, then if he'd thought about killing himself. "I'm not sure. Maybe. Not really." "Just between us," Tom said, "if you decide to go all the way, call me. Tom Braithwaite. I'm in the book." George lay in bed, wondering what the guy meant by all the way. Did that mean Tom would dissuade him, or that he'd assist? George decided to jot down the guy's number, just in case. He tiptoed into the hall, scanned the phone book, and crept back to safety. He looked around at his room. There was the Disneyland map. There the poster of Pluto, his ears flying up in the air. There the Mickey and Minnie desk lamp. There the oval-shaped mirror with Donald Duck chasing his nephews around the frame. He struggled up, took the mirror from its nail. He laid it out on the floor. He pulled his ass open, hoping to see what the men were so wild about. He could guess it'd resemble a cave, but, with the swelling and stuff, it looked exactly like Injun Joe's cave, his 8th or 9th favorite Disneyland ride at the moment. He stumbled upon it 5 years ago. Inside it was a slight disappointment, too narrow and crowded, but he still made a beeline for it at least once every visit, and spent a while outside its painted mouth, squinting into the dark, covered with goosebumps. He climbed into bed and was almost asleep when he thought of his diary. He hadn't written in it for weeks. Once he'd thought it would empty him out, but writing was no help. It just kept his feelings from getting lost. Still, why not? Drugs are finally getting to me. I'm going through things I guess I shouldn't because it seems fun, but it isn't. Does that make sense? I don't know anymore, and I don't really care. Life's sort of out of control, though I guess that's my own stupid fault. I think the last I wrote, Cliff and I were best friends. He changed a lot. We waved to each other at school, but that's it. I shouldn't have let him have sex with me. He told me we would be friends for eternity. He said a lot of things. All shit. This is so boring. I guess that's why I stopped writing. I'm fucked up. I don't know what to do. I don't even think I'm alive anymore. I'm walking around, but I'm not really there. If I didn't have sex with Philippe, I'd go nuts. School's nothing. I hate my friends. Nobody's interested in me anymore. They think I'm cute, then they get really bored. If I don't sleep with people, they hate me. But when I do, they think they know me or something. I hope not. I don't know what I should call Philippe. He doesn't love me, I guess. It's weird he's not getting bored, but that's because he pretends I'm dead. I can't understand what that stuff's all about. But I don't mind. It doesn't matter. I've been trying to make myself great for a long time. I know I'm too closed around people, but when I talk, like with Cliff, it doesn't make any difference. I can still be amusing sometimes, except it's more like just weird lately. I keep saying I'll change, and I want to, but all I do is get tense. That's okay for a while. Acid's great, but I think stupid things while I'm on it. I still dream of living in Disneyland. I don't know how long I've been saying that. I guess I hope something fantastic is going to happen. I don't think it's up to me. I'll try, but it's hard to say stuff like that without getting bored. Like right now, I'm totally bored. I don't understand that. George felt like shit. The clock focused. 7:12. He dressed and ran to the bus stop. His shirt was on inside out. Shit! He climbed in and sat behind Jerry Cox. George liked to look at the back of his head. His hair was blonde, wavy, thick. It made George think of a crystal ball. He planned the day ahead. At school, he hit the head, took some acid. He was hallucinating all morning. Algebra, woodshop, and history drifted past, like puffy clouds when he lay on his back. At noon, he dumped his textbooks in his locker and filled up a tray in the lunchroom. Paul was waiting for him at their usual table. After a few minutes, Sally and Max, her new boyfriend, joined in. Max told some racist jokes. Sally constructed a tower of Pepsi cans and dubbed it George Miles Nude. They shared an angry look. Paul pointed out a drug dealer who sold the best grass in the universe. George made a mental note. George was taking his last bite of spice cake when Fred, a dumb jock, wandered by. "Hey, fag!" Fred said as he sauntered by. "I hear you're shit in bed." George pretended he hadn't quite heard that. The asshole always made fun of him. "George, what—" "Forget it, Paul." "What's this about?" Sally piped in. "Something wrong, George?" He tried to play it cool. "No, nothing. It's just some bullshit a former best friend of mine's spreading around." Sally's face whitened. "Gee, I thought I was your former best friend." Jesus, George thought. 10 minutes later, George saw Liar David sit down at the next table. He leaned over and yelled, "I hear you're Cliff's latest fuck." David blushed, spilled some milk down his shirt. "Oh, hi. I didn't think you would mind. I admire you a lot." George scowled and left him in peace. "Anyway, Sally—" The bell rang. George waved goodbye. He was heading for chemistry class when he thought he heard, "Hey, Miles!" Mr. McGo pinned his head in a vice grip, dragging him into an empty class. "Got any grass, addict?" "No, fucking let me go." "Oh, such a tough kid," the teacher laughed. "When are we going to hang out?" George whined. Mr. McGo cleared his throat, grinned. "I like you, George. You know that. If I were gay—" But George knew he was gay. He'd propositioned Paul recently, then thrown a fit when it didn't work out. Next thing Paul knew, there was a giant red F on his book report. There was no point in confronting McGo. He'd never drop his guard. "See ya," George said. "Fuck it," is what he meant. He was a few minutes late for class, but no problem. He poured the blue liquid in with the yellow stuff and brought the goo to a boil. Blub, blub, blub. CO2 plus N equals nitrogen oxide or some such shit. He'd never made sense of any of it. He watched the second hand spinning around and around and around. On his way to the bus, he took the rest of his acid. The trip home was better than usual. They almost hit an old man in a crosswalk. He slammed the front door and stopped in the kitchen. "I want your ass here, now, this second!" It was his dad's voice. George strolled to the den, threw himself on the couch. Puff, their Siamese cat, got confused and leapt off. "What's this?" his dad bellowed, holding some paper up. It was Philippe's list. George thought, if I tell him the truth, I'll have to sneak out from now on. But if I say it's a joke, he'll think I'm crazy, and then what? He had to say something. "Someone I slept with once gave that to me. I thought it was weird, but she wants to be a biology teacher. What's the girl's name? Forget it. I'm not going to tell you that. She's just a strange girl. Besides, it's been months. Let's drop it. No. This is serious, George, his dad shouted. I know a little French. I've never seen such filth. Phlegm flew out of his mouth when he got to the F. George saw his chance to escape. How dare you spit on me? He rose to his feet. His dad shoved him back on the couch. I'm taking you to see your mother, he said. Maybe she can do something. I give up. Get your coat. George trotted into his room, swearing under his breath. Drawers had been yanked out and dumped on the bed, posters ripped up, books thrown about. George was amazed by how flimsy his kingdom had been. One person had brought the thing tumbling down. Then he remembered his diary. He shoved his arm under the mattress. It was there, locked tight. Phew. George was biting his nails when their car stopped in front of the hospital. Can't I go see a psychiatrist instead? He moaned. His dad shook his head. Just go in. She's in room 639 on the top floor. I'll be back in an hour. George entered the place thinking, I'm not nearly stoned enough. A nurse saw him traipsing around the halls. You look like you're lost, she smiled. George admitted he was. The address plate for room 639 had apparently fallen off. She gave the door a push. You're on your own. Inside, his mom was asleep. It looked permanent. There was a video monitor near her head. A little light was drawing mountains across it. George watched for a while. It wasn't interesting. It was like one of those odd things that came on a TV screen after a station went off for the night. Was it trying to say something? He listened to the mechanical whir of the monitor. Once he thought he heard a scratchy voice say, This is it? Oh. Some nurse, a new one, had walked in. You must be this woman's son. Just a minute, I'll wake her. Before George could say don't, she rustled her way to the bed. She squeezed his mom's shoulder. Her eyes flipped open. She glanced around. Your child's here, the nurse chirped. She left. George and his mother looked blankly at each other. Hi. Dad dropped me off. She didn't say anything, so George peeked at the monitor. It held the same boring image. By the time he got back to her face, she was opening and closing her mouth. Finally, sounds came out. George, she sighed. Then, after several more jaw movements, yes. This was what George had expected. She'd become scary. He wanted some acid. She was trying to talk again. Your father, she wheezed, told me something. Her face scrambled in an attempt to remember. George couldn't think how to distract her. He smiled, hoping she'd tell him how cute he was. Eventually she did, not in so many words, but her eyes said it. Or he assumed they had. He glanced out the window. All he could see was the wall of another wing. One of its windows was open, and though the insides were dark, he heard a TV set. That's where that voice must have come from. He couldn't tell what was on, maybe news or a soap opera. Something too serious. Nice day, he said. His mom appeared to agree. So, school's going fine. You know me, I try. He talked about every uninteresting thing he could think of. She watched him. At least her eyes were pointed his way. They could have been saying, You're cute, or It's a nice day, or Go on. He looked at the monitor. Its puny mountains were gone. There was a light jetting over the screen, a straight line being started again and again. It made him think of John, pencil to paper, erasing, redrawing, until he had gotten George right. When that thought disappeared, he saw the light. He'd seen that happen in movies. He knew what it meant. He stared at his mom for a while. Then he stood up, walked into the hall, and stopped the first nurse he saw. Mom's... shit. Dead. She yelled to another nurse, who came running. Where? They asked, kind of angrily. The room with no number, George said. He sat on a low brick wall near the hospital entrance. He watched people go in and out. As they approached the door, it sensed their presence and swung open. There were doors like that everywhere, but he'd never thought about them before. He stood and inched toward it. When he was 5 feet away, it opened. The car drove up. George climbed in. They'd already gone a few blocks when his dad asked, "How is she?" George thought for a second. "Dead." He was glad when his dad didn't say anything. They made a U-turn, parked, locked up, and walked toward the entrance. When they were 5 feet away from the door, it opened. "Well, it's over. She's dead. I don't know what I'm supposed to think. I just wish I hadn't been there when it happened. Dad thinks it's my fault. He didn't say so, but I can tell. Shit. He's the one who upset her. He did it. Not me. I was just there. I'm going to use this to make myself change, like a starting point. I think that's the best thing to do. I won't buy any more drugs. I'll try not to do what I always do. I never do anything other than school and Philippe. Tomorrow I'll clean up my room and make it look like a normal place. I think I'll burn all my Disneyland stuff, so I can't change my mind. Nobody else was ever interested in the stuff anyway, and all my feelings for it are destroyed by the drugs now. I called Cliff tonight, just to talk. He doesn't care anymore. He kept saying how cute David was. I guess they're in love. He said that David is sort of obsessed or whatever with me. I don't know why, but it pisses him off. I hung up. It's strange I'm not sad about Mom. I guess it took such a long time I felt everything I could feel already. I wish I hadn't been there, but I'm glad the last person she looked at was me. She really loved me once. Likewise, I guess. I think I'm afraid of stuff. Maybe that's it. I was afraid Mom would die, but now she has, and it's okay. I can't let it stop me from doing things. I'm going to keep that in my mind from now on. I mean it. I'm not ready to sleep. I have 1 hit of acid left. I've decided to take it and go visit Tom, Philippe's friend. It's like a party or something, to say my goodbye to the person I am. I'll let you know what happens. I'm off. George sat on a couch, sipping gin from a tumbler. Tom was building a fire in the fireplace. George was sufficiently high, but the way Tom was watching the flames made him jumpy. "So, what you been up to?" George asked. Tom jabbed a log with an iron bar. George tried again. "Nice place." He meant the paintings. "A friend did them." Tom set down the bar. "My friend believes corpses dream," he said. "Try to imagine each work is the dream of a murdered child." George couldn't. "Poor baby. School hasn't done you a lick of good, has it?" George could relate to that. "Nope." "But you don't need to know anything, do you? Your beauty is far more profound than the works of our fine intellectuals, don't you think?" "I don't know," George chortled nervously. "What a bizarre thing to say." Tom wandered over and kissed, or rather sucked, George's mouth, as if it were a snake bite. George laughed so hard he spilled his drink on his shirt. Tom ripped it open. "Hey," George said, "I need to wear this tomorrow." "Don't kid me," Tom snapped. "You know you won't need a shirt." George didn't know what that meant, but he was too stoned to fight. "Okay, I'm sorry. Go on. Really." George's new jeans got the same treatment. Next thing he knew, everything he'd had on was turning black in the fireplace. Tom dragged him onto the rug, did the vacuuming bit on his ass. George tried the shit, but he just hadn't eaten enough. "That's okay," Tom said, and wiped his mouth. "I get the idea. Wait here." Tom left the room. George stretched his legs. He'd begun to hallucinate slightly. He kept confusing the windows and paintings. It's about time, he thought. Tom was a creep, but now things wouldn't matter so much. He was about to go over and refill his tumbler when Tom came back. "Lie on your stomach," he barked. George did. He heard a clinking noise, then felt a tiny, sharp pain in his ass. "It's just some Novocaine," Tom muttered, "so that I can take you apart sans your pointless emotions." That's considerate, George thought. Just then his ass grew so numb he felt sliced in half. "Let's go." George, walking unsteadily, followed the man down a steep flight of stairs. Maybe it was the numbness, but he couldn't see very well. There was something on one of the walls. A shelf? Things piled all over it? Tom took a piece of the blur in his hand. It looked fun. No, it looked kind of dangerous. Tom raised the blur to the level of George's chest. "Do you know what's inside that cute body of yours?" George didn't have any idea, but he couldn't risk sounding naive. "I think I do." "Really?" Tom said. "You might be surprised. Would you like to know?" George shrugged. That seemed the safest response. George was about to cry. He was right on the edge. He had to hand it to Tom. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so upset. When Tom indicated the floor, George went flat. He heard a series of sounds. The only thing they remotely resembled was somebody chopping a tree down. Tom didn't talk for a while. The sounds continued. George listened attentively. He realized he was being chopped down. He sort of wished he could know how it felt, but Tom was right. He'd be crying his eyes out and miss the good parts. It was enough to see his blood covering the floor, like a magic rug. The strange-sounding music stopped. George heard a soft voice. "Any last words?" it asked. George was surprised by the question. If he was supposed to be dead, how could he talk? Still, why not? "Dead men tell no tales," he said in his best spooky voice. When Tom didn't laugh, George bit his lip. That's all it took. He burst into tears. He felt a couple of slashes across his back. "I said no fucking emotions," Tom yelled. "Do you want me to kill you or not?" "No," George sobbed. "Well, then what are you doing here?" "I don't know," George blubbered. "I don't know." He was rolled onto his back. Through his tears, he saw Tom's glasses. "Get out of here!" They came flying off. "Now! Stand!" George struggled up to his feet. "I don't have anything to wear," he choked. Tom stormed out of the room, then came back with a blanket and threw it at George's head. George made his way to the door. "No, this way," Tom said, forcing open a small window near the ceiling. "You'll drip all over my house." George dragged himself through the dusty rectangle. A hand grabbed his ankle. "Don't tell anyone how this happened," Tom hissed. "You're dead if you do." George stumbled home, crumpling to the sidewalk occasionally. When headlights appeared in the distance, he hid in the closest bush. The walk took hours. The blanket was no help at all. It got soaked with blood and grew very cold. He'd cry a while, then shiver, which made him cry again. The house was dark. He climbed through his window. When he saw the ruins of his room, it made him cry again. He found a note from his dad on the foot of the bed. "David called. Who's he?" Good question, George thought. And I've got a better one. He scrounged around in the rubble and found his mirror. His ass wasn't really an ass anymore. He couldn't look at it. He dropped the mirror. It shattered. He walked down the hall and knocked twice on his dad's door. After a minute, it opened. George looked in the man's puffy eyes. He whispered, "I think you should call for an ambulance."